Hi, Kate here. Hope everyone's doing well. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. I'm doing okay. This is my second attempt at recording this. I recorded this originally Sunday morning. It turned out to be an hour and a half, way too long. And unfortunately, a little while ago, I accidentally deleted it. So this is my second attempt doing it. This is a quick and dirty guide to Iran. I want to make this quick and as concise as possible. As everybody probably knows, last week, I'm recording this July 1st. Last week, Tucker Carlson interviewed Ted Cruz, and I'm not promoting Tucker Carlson at all, but Tucker Carlson interviewed Ted Cruz, who wants to bomb Iran, basically. Ted Cruz didn't know basic things about Iran, didn't know the population, didn't know the ethnic composition, and all that. So I'm going to go over some basic things about Iran. I'll try to make this as concise as possible. So the population of Iran is, and I'm not going to go into current stuff. I'm not going to talk a lot about what current situation. There are people far better than I who could deal with this. So anyway, Iran, the population of Iran is 91 million. Iran is a multi-ethnic state. The dominant ethnic group are the Persians, who are 60% of the population. Um, there's a difference between Persian and Iranian. A bit complicated. So, Iranian is a language family. According to Wikipedia, there are 85 Iranian languages in the world, vast area from Western China all the way into Europe. The Ossetians are in Europe, Eastern Europe are an Iranian-speaking people. A gazillion, many small groups. Iranian language is very far flung. Persian is a subgroup of the Iranian languages. So they're Persians and they're Iranians. So the Persians are the dominant group of Iran. The terms can be used interchangeably for the country. There's somewhat different connotations. Iran is somewhat more of a nationalistic connotation, slightly more different connotation. So the Persians are 60% of Iran. There are many other groups. 20% are Azeris. They speak an Iranian language. They're actually no, sorry, they speak a Turkic language. They're actually Turkified Iranians. Genetically, they're an Iranian people, but they've been adopted a Turkic culture, a Turkic language. So the Azeris, there's Azerbaijan, north of Iran. That was back in the day. The Russian Empire grabbed a chunk of what had been when the Persian Empire. So it's Azerbaijan, but 20% are Azeris. Then there are Baluchis, south in the southern part of Iran. They speak an Iranian language, not Persian. They're Sunni Muslims, as far as I understand. There's a Baluchistan, which is part of Pakistan. The British divided. There are also many other groups, Iranian groups and Turkic-speaking groups. A zillion small nationalities, small ethnic groups rather. The Tats, the many other small groups. There are also Georgians, Circassians, and Armenians. In their own country, they're Christian, but in Iran, they're Muslim. 90% of Iran is Shia Muslim, but there are many Sunnis as well. The Baluchis are Sunnis and some other groups. There's a small number of Arabs, 1 to 2% Arab. There are a bunch of other groups. There are Christians in Iran. There are Zoroastrians, which was the original religion. There are 10,000 Jews. Max Blumenthal, the journalist, recently visited Iran. He's Jewish. He made contact with Iranian Jews, and the leadership of the Jewish community in Iran is anti-Zionist. Although individual, there's mixed within the community. It is kind of mixed, but it's some really interesting stories to tell about this. Okay, so historically, I'm going to go really brief. The origins of the Iranian people. Okay, Iranian is an Indo-European language. In the last 10 years, DNA analysis, DNA sequencing, since about 2014, 2015, DNA sequencing has rewritten our view of prehistoric peoples. So there are several peoples around 7,000 years ago, groups around what's called the Pontic Caspian steppe, area between the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, a little ways north, southern Russia and Ukraine. That region, several groups merged. I believe that's where the Indo-European languages came from. Most of the languages of Europe, languages of northern India, and the Iranian languages originated there. It's very complicated. An early culture was a Yamnaya culture. And then another culture was the corded ware culture, somewhere about 6,000 years ago. Corded ware. Then a group of corded ware people went into Europe, brought the Indo-European languages into Europe, the Russia, the Slavic, Balto-Slavic peoples. Then further in, they merged with other groups. They were the Belbeaker culture, various archaeological cultures. They went into Europe, but a group of these people, the Yamnaya, or similar to Yamnaya, went back east again. The motivation was copper. I was looking for copper. This was during the Chalcolithic age, and we copper tools. So there was this Santashta culture. I don't have the exact dates. The Santashta culture was south central Russia. Really fascinating culture. It's believed that's where the Indo-Iranian languages came from. The languages of they brought the language, Indo-European Aryan languages of northern India, and also Iranian languages. So then there were two other archaeological cultures which spun off from Satasha. By the way, fascinating culture there. There's cities there. There, one Arkham, really famous city in Satasha. There wasn't a unified state. They apparently they were very warlike. They had war with each other, fighting over resources, probably copper and water. Interestingly, we believe they're the ancestors of the Indo-Iranian people because their burial practices, the way they buried people, and there's evidence it corresponded with very ancient, early stages of Hinduism, Vedic or pre-Vedic Hinduism. The burial customs are the same, and some of the motifs and symbols they used. So it's pretty likely they came down. Part of them came down into India. Another group came and formed the Iranians. Okay, there are two other archaeological cultures. There's Andronovo culture in Russia. These are Russian names, by the way. Andronovo and Shrubnaya culture. These are Iranians. They were the Iranians. And one group formed their branch off there, the Scythians, which probably around 5th century, 4th, 5th century BCE. They covered a large area of southern Russia, into China, and partly into Europe. Scythians are fascinating people. Vast. They were Iranians, or Iranian-speaking people anyway. Iranic peoples. Some of them used large quantities of cannabis in their religious rituals. They were really intriguing people. Anyway, a group of Iranian-speaking people went into what's called the Iranian Plateau, probably around 4,000 years ago, 4,000 BCE, and they formed the people of Persia. There were several Iranian-speaking groups, and they formed Iran. So, okay, get closer to recorded history. There are the Mesopotamian civilizations, Babylon. This is right near Iran's right near the Mesopotamian civilizations. There were Babylon, Neo-Babylonian Empire. Then there were the Medes. The Medes weren't Iranian-speaking people. They may be ancestors of the Kurds. We actually don't really know. Most likely were. They were they had an empire for a time, and they conquered the Persians, another Iranian group. But then the Persians had to have rebelled against them and formed their own empire. They conquered the Medes, and the Medes were then like junior partners in the Persian Empire, and they founded the Achaemenid dynasty, the first large Persian dynasty. The Achaemenid formed 550 BC. And first leader, Emperor Shah was Cyrus. Cyrus the Great, Kurush. I believe it's Kurush in Persian. Epic figure. He apparently had a sense of social justice. He wrote the first Bill of Rights. There's a copy of it in front of the UN in New York in different languages. So he banned slavery. Actually, when the Persian Empire expanded, they freed slaves. They banned slavery and they banned human sacrifice. So the Persian Empire covered a vast area. They conquered Egypt, conquered Mesopotamia, part of India into the Indus Valley, conquered part of India, and part of the Caucasus, which is now Georgia and Armenia, and actually into the Balkans. Vast area, biggest empire for its time. So the Achaemenids had a famous collision with ancient Greece, really complicated. They tried to conquer Greece twice, really. They invaded Greece. The Battle of Thermopylae, the Spartans fought against them. They lost, but the famous Spartans had this message: give word to our fellow countrymen that we died here so that we shall not pass. Epic struggle there at Battle Marathon, where the Athenians have beat back the Persians. Now, this is kind of ingrained in Western culture. Like the Persians were the first other, the bad guys, the other. Like during the Cold War with the U.S. and the Soviet Union was the other. Most of what we know from the Persian Empire from that time comes from Greek sources. And we don't, Persia itself had a very sophisticated culture. So we have it from the Greek side of it, really interesting. I forgot to mention religion. Persian religion was fascinating, is fascinating. It went in, we didn't have some idea what the Scythian religion was like. They were very similar to early Hinduism, Vedic Hinduism in India. They're the same gods, they're similar gods, basically the same thing. They kind of went in different directions. Vedic Hinduism became more, gradually became a sacrificial religion. Like the sacrifice was more important than the gods. And then they absorbed a lot of stuff from the indigenous people there, they're already there. While Persian religion went in some other directions. So there's religion of Zoroastrianism, which probably was founded a little bit before the Persian Empire, a little bit before the Persian Empire was founded. Zoroaster was a religious leader. We don't know a huge amount about him, but he codified, founded Zoroastrianism. Basically, a lot of the Persian gods were demoted. They're the devas, which we get the English word diva from. The devas, you shouldn't worship them. You should worship one god, Ahura Mazda. He was the good god. And Zoroastrianism was dualistic, good versus evil, very, very moral religion. The bad god was Angra Maya, I believe something like that. Angra Maya, the god of evil, the god of the lie. And Zoroastrianism was like a cosmic struggle between good and evil. Many people say that like the Western idea of the Western dualism came from Iranian religion. It's really interesting. So it became early on was with the Achaemenid dynasty being the official state religion of Iran, of Persia, for better or worse. They're a fascinating religion. But for the record, I'm an atheist. I'm not a believer. But there were fascinating religious and spiritual currents which came out of Iran, came out of Persia. A bit later on, there's a Mithraism, worship of Mithra, the Persian god Mithra. It was popular among the Roman army. There were Mithric temples found in Britain. The Roman legionnaires in Britain brought this with them. There's Gnosticism, like second century AD. Christian heresy. There were a bunch of different Gnostic currents. His book, The Gnostic Gospels, by Elaine Pagels. Anyway, Gnosticism kind of was based on currents coming out of Iran, dualistic currents. The Gnosticism was the god everybody worships is really the evil god. There's the inner god. Anyway, the whole fascinating story. Later on, there's Manichaeism, which was kind of a cross between Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Buddhism. It was popular like 2nd, 3rd century, 4th century AD, along the Silk Road. It's a whole other story. So there's religious currents which came out of Iran. So anyway, I'm talking about Iran, Persia had this collision with the Greeks, Greek city-states, and they were pushed back. So there was this general guy, Xenophon. He was a Greek general and historian. And at one point in the Achaemenid dynasty, there was a civil war. So Xenophon, if he was a historian, he knew Socrates. We know the philosopher Socrates from two sources, really. Plato's dialogues. Plato probably used, Socrates didn't write anything down, by the way, as a philosopher, but he was a stonemason. He was wander around he didn't get along with his wife, apparently an ugly guy, but he would wander around the marketplace, ask people like Socratic dialogue, force people to examine their basic assumptions. I said the unexamined life is not worth living. So anyway, we know about Socrates from Xenophon and Plato. So the story is Xenophon was, there was a civil war in the Achaemenid dynasty a bit later on, and they hired a lot of Greek mercenaries. The Greeks were regarded as good fighters at this time. So they decided they were fighting on one Xenophon's side when he commanded 10,000 troops, and they won this epic battle. But then the king died shortly thereafter. And back then it wasn't like an ideological war. It was the king died, so the war was over, your side was over. And like, this is a meme, like, I'm in danger. Like, screw shit. Well, holy crap, we're in enemy territory now. The Greeks were in enemy territory, so they had to fight their way out. He wrote a book on it called Anabasis, The March of the 10,000. I've read parts of it. It's epic. It's one of the most exciting stories, usually believed to be the most exciting stories in history. I don't like war, things like that, but they had to fight their way from central Greece to the Black Sea. Epic story. Okay, why this is important so well later. Alexander the Great, who was Macedonian, not Greek, but Macedonian, which is a little country north of Greece. They were Macedonians were regarded as the backwater of the Greeks, the backside of the Greek people, and in some ways they were kind of part of Greek culture, but looked down on. So Alexander read this, and it really inspired him, and thought we can conquer Persia, and he did. Alexander, you conquered the Greeks, you unified the Greeks, and you created this huge army and conquered the Achaemenid, destroyed the Achaemenid Empire. That was conquered the Achaemenid Empire. I believe it was 336 BC or BCE. It was finally defeated. Achaemenid Empire was destroyed. He created this big empire. Alexander created this vast empire. He conquered Egypt and then Mesopotamia into India. He wanted to go into India. His army rebelled against him, but he conquered this vast empire, and then he died. I think he was 33 when he died. He couldn't hold his empire together, and it broke up. So there are the successor states, what they call the Diadochi. They fought against each other for about 120 years. The main thing was Egypt. Alexander put these Greek, small Greek upper ruling class in these various states. He wanted an exchange of cultures. It didn't really work. One time he ordered his troops, his generals, to marry Persian women. People laughed at it at the time, but there actually was an interesting fusion of cultures. There was actually later on a Greek Buddhist kingdom in Afghanistan. Pretty wild stuff. There were interesting fusions of cultures, but so anyway, Alexander's empire broke up. The core of it was Ptolemaic Egypt. Egypt was ruled by the Ptolemies, a Greek Macedonian dynasty, a small Greek ruling class in Alexandria. But there was also the successor of Persia was a Seleucid empire. It was a Greek Persian empire. Seleucid empire was established in 312. Didn't last very long. These successor states, Greek successor states, were fighting with each other for about 120 years. So this empire finally dwindled and was taken over by an Iranian empire, the Parthians. The Parthian Empire, which was established in 247 AD. And whereas I know they're not really that important, really big important empire for Greek history for Persian history after the Achaemenids. A little bit later was the Sassanid Empire. Okay, so the Sassanids were from Sassanid Empire 224 AD to 641 AD. They were about 400 years. They were one of the most important dynasties in Persian history. Cultural high point, one of the cultural high points. They conquered a huge area. They wanted to replicate the Achaemenid dynasty. So they conquered Egypt, Mesopotamia, pretty almost the same as the Achaemenids. They had a highway system, their road system, postal system, supported universities. The university system, they actually supported culture, big supporters of culture. They revived Zoroastrianism, like Orthodox Zoroastrianism. Under the Parthians and other groups, they were like offshoots, like Zoroastrian sects. They codified mainstream Orthodox Zoroastrianism. Okay, so they were known for architecture, use of space and palaces were pretty amazing. Use of space and building domes. They also were known for friezes, Frize, along the ceiling. There were tapestries and Persian carpets, things like that. A lot of their culture went into later. They were pre-Islamic, but their culture went into later Muslim civilization, Islamic civilizations. They had a big contribution. Okay, so the Sassanids had a long series of wars with the Byzantine Empire, which had been the Roman Empire. Western Roman Empire fell. There was Eastern Roman Empire, which became Greek-speaking, and basically was Greek-speaking, became known as the Byzantine Empire. So it kind of continued like almost 1,000-year war with Greek people. Whole series of wars were really ruinous. Later on, towards the end, there's like a 20-year war. The Persians and the Byzantines, like this 20-year war. They were fighting over holy relics. Like there was the True Cross in Jerusalem, which is supposed to be the cross Jesus died on, and who was supposed to be the cross Jesus died. And so what happens is the Persians would seize it, would take it, bring it back to Persia, and then they bring it back to Persia, and the Byzantines would invade, and they'd take it back. They were fighting. It was kind of a ridiculous situation. But the Persians would sponsor like Greek philosophers who Christianity is uniquely really intolerant. They shut down the Greek schools of philosophy. So Persians would invite philosophers to come to Greece to continue their work. They kind of banned Christianity most of the time because it's religion of the enemy, but they supported Christian heresies, Nestorians, various Christian heresy groups. So finally, both these groups fought themselves to exhaustion. They fought themselves to exhaustion here. And then there's the Arab conquest, which is the Arab conquest, 640s, 650s. So 611 AD, the Prophet Muhammad received the call in Mecca. That God gave him a series of revelations. And central Saudi Arabia, like by the 7th century AD, central Saudi Arabia, the Hijaz, was kind of a backward place. It was surrounded by very ancient advanced civilizations, but central Saudi Arabia itself was kind of a backwater. The Arab people were kind of passed by. There was ferment. There was a lot of stuff from various religions, versions of Judaism and Christianity were kind of filtering in. So 611 AD, the Prophet Muhammad received the call, like a series of revelations from God, which was kind of correcting Judaism and Christianity. It was building on a Brahmic religion, but sorting out the kinks, so to speak. And a series of like 2 generations. They were basically there was a series of conquests. The Arabs branched out and conquered a huge area, a vast area, and they conquered a big chunk of what had been the Byzantine Empire, Syria, Egypt, North Africa, that region, and then they conquered Persia. They conquered the Sassanid Empire around 640s, 650s. Sassanid Empire was kind of defeated, I think, around 641 AD, and that was then became part of what's known as the Umayyad Caliphate, the first Muslim empire. So the Umayyad Caliphate lasted 90 years. It was essentially an Arab empire. It was early cultural high point of the Muslim world, but it did develop a lot of contradictions about when the role of non-Arab Muslims who were left out of the society. They formed a lower class. What is the relationship of them to the society? There was an uprising, largely led by Persians, Muslim Persians. The Abbasid army, the rebel army, was largely staffed and commanded by Persians, interestingly. So I don't have the dates on the Abbasids. The Abbasids took over. They moved their capital from, the Umayyads, their capital was in Damascus. The Abbasids moved it further east to Baghdad. And Baghdad, which is now Iraq, was originally a Persian city. It was designed along Persian lines. And the Persians played a big role in the Abbasid Caliphate. They played a big role. And there was more of a multinational Muslim empire. It wasn't just an Arab empire. It became more of a multinational. Other people were included in it. Okay, so the Abbasids couldn't control they dwindled. They weren't really overthrown, but they just dwindled. They couldn't control their eastern borders. Whereas Turkic groups came in. They lost control. Abbasids eventually ended up as like a ceremonial caliphate around Baghdad. And there was a Turkic group called the Khwarezmians, who established a caliphate. They pushed the Abbasids out. They established a caliphate for some time. And then there was the Mongol conquest. Now, Mongol conquest was around 1220s, early 1220s. What happened is Genghis Khan, the Mongols, sent an emissary to the Khwarezmians and to negotiate terms, so the Khwarezmians had them killed. Big mistake. You don't do this with Genghis Khan. Big mistake. The Mongols invaded, and they were extremely destructive. They conquered most of the Muslim world. They conquered Baghdad. The stories that they built a mountain full of human skulls. It was extremely devastating. According to John Green of Crash Course, makes these history videos, which is kind of fun to watch, said they wiped out 3/4 of the population of Persia. It might be an exaggeration. I'm not really sure, but it was really destructive. They also were pagans. Their religion was Tengrism, like a shamanic pagan religion. The Muslims were appalled by this. Later on, they converted to Islam in various places. So the Mongols, for a while, had a vast empire. They were initially very destructive. But the Mongol Empire developed a massive cultural exchange. They said a version could go all the way from Beijing China to Hungary without being molested at all. This was, vast area from China. The Mongol Empire was from China to Persia to Egypt, I believe Egypt, to Russia, well into Eastern Europe. A vast area, and there was cultural exchange. Like Persian artists were brought to the court of the Khans in Beijing, and they came back. And Chinese art had a big influence in Persian culture. You see art from that area, so Chinese style art, big, huge cultural exchange, which was interesting for the time. It didn't last very long. The Mongol Empire eventually broke up, and something called the Ilkhanate, Khanate ruled Persia. They're not terribly popular. They're in the 1400s. They were eventually pushed out. And the Hazara people, ethnic group in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, are partly descended from the Mongols who conquered Persia. They're mixed in with other groups, but they look East Asian. They speak Persian. They're Shia Muslims, but they're partially descended from the Mongols who conquered Persia in that area. So that was going on. So the next really important dynasty in Persian history are the Safavids. Came out. Safavids are really interesting. They were Zeris, came from Azerbaijan, and they started as a Sufi order. And they also brought Shia Islam to Persia. So I'm going to have to talk very briefly first about Shia Islam and then about Sufism. And I'm not an expert in either one. So Shia Islam, there's Sunnis, the more mainstream, I guess, majority of Islam. As I understand, Shia in the whole Muslim world as a whole, Shias are about 3/4 of the Muslims. Generally the poor, except for in Iran, they're usually the poorer part of the population. So there's a dispute over the caliphate, over the successors to Muhammad. They're what they call the four Rashidun, the rightly guided caliphs. There's Ali, there's a guy Ali, who's the son-in-law of Muhammad. He was supposed to be caliph. Eventually he was, but there was basically, it was disputed. There was basically a civil war situation. Guy, Muawiyah, who had been part of a merchant family, which Muhammad originally fought against, but this family, the Umayyads, have converted to Islam. They later found the Umayyad dynasty. So Muawiyah claimed the caliphate. There was very complicated. There was a civil war. So Ali was eventually assassinated by a fundamentalist group. And he had two sons, Hassan and Hussein. Hassan led the Shia came to me. It was the faction, the party. He led this group, which claimed the caliphate. The idea was supposed to be inherited, and he claimed the caliphate. He was killed. So his brother Hussein led this movement. He was defeated at the Battle of Karbala, in what's now Iraq. That became like an epic thing in Shia mythology, Shia history. A lot of his followers, for some reason, did not come out to support him, and I'm not sure why. So a lot of Shia today, like, regret this. They do, like, symbolically flagellate themselves to, like, it's obviously reenacting a mythological event, but Ashura is their holiday. Commemorate the Battle of Karbala. Huge thing in Shia Islam. So anyway, there were various lines of succession. Iran today, the Safavids in Iran today is the 12 of Shiism. There's their 12 imams, what they call an imam, who has a special relationship with God, and it's supposed to be like a 12. There are 12 of them altogether. The 12th one is occluded, like vanished, totally vanished. It borrows on mythological tropes from way, way back. There are other branches of Shiism. The Houthis, or the Ansar Allah, the Houthis are the tribe in Yemen, are Shia. They're a faction of Shia Islam, which is more closer to Sunnism. So there are different factions and lines of descent. Right? The Safavids were 12 are Shia. Also, there are Sufis. And Sufism is a branch, basically Islamic mysticism or spirituality. It became popular during the Umayyads. The Umayyads were like legalistic and dry, and Sufism appealed to people's emotional side. They like danced and did like ecstatic trances to create an altered state of consciousness, chanting, and the whirling dervishes are Sufis. There are a zillion different groups. There's Sufi orders, many Sufi orders. There's kind of been a semi-underground thing in Islam. They're all pervasive in the Muslim world, sort of semi-underground. They're banned in Saudi Arabia. They're more above ground. Anyway, they're now really big in Iranian culture, a big part of Iranian culture, and Turkey as well. Sufism plays a semi-underground but huge role in these societies. So the Salafids started out as actually a Sufi order, and they saw their job to provide, to teach people. And the idea of Sufism also, we think of them as mystic, pacifist, and a lot of them are, but there's also a warrior religion. Sufism appealed to Turkic peoples on the fringes of the Persian world. They were warriors. They faced death every day. So Sufism had the idea of ego death. Like the death of, you know anything about psychedelic drugs, is ego death. You feel your ego dies. This appealed to people who were living on the edge of death every day anyway. It was sort of became a kind of a warrior religion. And Sufism is not a sect, it's sort of like a broad tendency within Islam. It became deeply ingrained in Persian society, Persian culture. So the Safavids kind of started out with a Sufi order. They also become kind of messianic or millenarian. They sort of, maybe their job was to provide guidance for the society as a whole and move it in. And they thought they were the Mahdi, the Muslim Messiah. They got kind of messianic. They borrowed tendencies from far earlier things. I forgot to mention, this is really important. There were back in earlier the Sassanid dynasty, the Mazdacs. They were a sect of they were the sect of Zoroastrians. They're socialists. They're proto-socialist, proto-communist group. They believe in class struggle. They are kind of a collectivist. They kind of represent a religious attempt to create socialism. They were eventually crushed. They were chased up into the mountains. Later on, they were I forget what is Quraymites, the Quraymites who were kind of officially Shia Muslims. They were regarded really Mazdacs, Zoroastrian Mazdacs in Shia Islam disguise. So these groups were back in the Sasanian and the later Abbasid Caliphate. So some of these groups influenced the Safavids. Safavids were not communist at all, but they kind of influenced them. So Safavids were another cultural high point of Persia. There's Shah Abbas, who rebuilt Isfahan, which was the capital of Persia at that time, and did apparently an amazing job, huge, very equivalent to anything in Europe around the time. They built a lot of mosques, which are, I've seen pictures of stunningly beautiful mosques. I think far more beautiful than European cathedrals at the time. Stunningly beautiful. They were amazingly aesthetically creative. Okay, Safavids eventually dwindled and collapsed. They were one of the high points of Persia, important dynasty to know about. Also, I have to talk a little bit about Persian literature before I go on too much further. There's the somewhat earlier, the Shahnameh, which is by Ferdowsi. It's an epic poem of Persia. It's a Persian history. It was written, I think, under the Khwarizmians, I believe. Anyway, it's goes from mythological history to the end of the Sassanid dynasty, early Persian, pre-Islamic Persian history. It's an epic poem. It's kind of a wistful look. It was written during the Muslim era, but it's a wistful look at pre-Islamic Persia, basically. And apparently, it's deeply ingrained in Iranian culture today. Every Iranian would know it. Probably recites parts of it. There are many editions of it. It's like, I don't know, Shakespeare or Moby Dick in the English-speaking world. It plays a big role in Persian culture that's deeply ingrained. There's also many other writers, Rumi, the Sufi mystic, and many Persian writers, and I don't have their names offhand, but which many people in the West don't really know about. So Persia was fantastically creative, period, during and before the Safavids. Okay, Safavids eventually collapsed. Another dynasty, more getting to the modern period, from the late 18th century to 1924, with the Qajar dynasty. The Qajars, it gets into the modern period. The Qajars were a Turkic dynasty, and they ruled during the beginning stages of European colonialism, when the Europeans were beginning to take over the global south, really. They were a horrible dynasty, utterly horrible dynasty. They were very corrupt. They were opium addicts, and it said they wanted all the benefits of ruling, but none of the responsibilities. So these people were they gave lots of concessions to Europeans, especially the British. A couple of things happened during, I think it's 1830s. I forget the date, but one of the Qajar Shahs went to Russia, so saw a Cossack battalion, and I think it was 1880s rather. He went to Russia, saw Cossack battalions. That's what I want. He liked the Cossacks. So they started something called the Persian Cossacks. They weren't literally Cossacks. They were a little bit different than the Russian Cossacks. The Russian Cossacks were feudal, like someone would get a land grant in return for service to the Tsar, service to the state. They were the Persian Cossacks were a little bit different, but they imitated the Cossacks, the Russian Cossacks. They had Russian officers. Now, this is important because it was the main part of the Persian army. The Khazars did not have a modern, like, national, central, national army, national military. They were tribal groups with lots of factions. They relied on tribal groups. Also, they had a police force, a gendarmerie, European trained police force. But other than that, they relied on the Persian Cossacks as their military. And it was kind of sort of controlled by Tsarist Russia. That's one thing. Went from the 1880s. That's one thing going on. Okay, so the Shahs, the Khazar Shahs, gave the British lots of concessions. They had a very lucrative tobacco industry, but the British controlled import and export of tobacco. They completely controlled it. The British controlled like transportation. They got 60% of the profits from bridges, roads, whatever railroads they had. The British got 60% of the profits. Oil was discovered around, I believe, 1901. But really, there was the Anglo-Iranian, first Anglo-Persian, then Anglo-Iranian oil company, which was being BP. So the British the deal was it was, I think, 84-16. The British would get 84% of the profits. The Iranians would get 16%. Not very fair. So the Qajars were selling off anything. One Qajar Shah had his lavish tour of Europe, borrowed a huge amount of money to do it, bankrupted his country. So then they set up this. The Europeans imposed this Belgian customs guy to rigidly enforce tariffs, which choked off to pay this off, which is humiliating for one thing, and it choked off foreign trade, things like that. Okay, so there was a tobacco protest of 1891 where the Shia clergy had this big campaign against tobacco, largely successful. The Shah finally withdrew the concession. That was successful. But there was really important in early modern Iranian history, Persian history. There was the Constitutional Revolution, started in 1905 to 1911. It was inspired by several things. First, the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. Russia defeated Japan. This was epic. This sent shockwaves around the world. This war sent shockwaves. Japan was a non-white, non-European country, defeated a European power, even though admittedly Russia was the most backward European power, but they defeated a European power. This sent shockwaves around the global south at the time. So also the Russian Revolution of 1905, there's the idea of a constitutional monarchy. So there were three different groups. There were some liberal and radical intellectuals who wanted to be more like Europe or adopt like constitutional government and some ideas of socialism. Then there were the merchant bazaars who were really being screwed by the monopoly the Europeans had. And then there was Shia clergy who didn't really like democracy that much, but they didn't like all these foreign influences. Also, Persia was being flooded with cheaper European goods, which was devastating the economy. So these groups wanted some check on the Qajar monarchy. So there was huge protest. They wanted a huge protest movement, which was led by the bazaar merchants. Hundreds of thousands of people protested. Equivalent of a teach-in at the British embassy. The British initially supported this movement. Later, they turned against it. So the Shah in 1906 granted a parliament and a constitution. The Majlis. They had a parliament. And in fact, he attended the first session, and he was very elderly. He died a few days after this. But they got a constitution and a parliament. But then the British and the Russians cooperated in crushing this. They made a deal. They divided Persia into spheres of influence. Russia invaded from the north. Britain invaded from the south. The Persian Cossacks were kind of used to crush this. They fired on the Majlis, on the parliament. They said anybody who stays here will be killed, and they ended it. I mean, there were some gains. As far as I know, the parliament kind of continued, and they kept the constitution, although it wasn't used. Nobody really paid much attention to it. There kind of were some gains, but the British and the Russians prevented it from going any further. They blocked any development of democracy. They didn't want Iran to be really independent. They wanted to keep Iran together as a country, but they didn't want to be independent, going into democracy. They didn't like that. So anyway, this thing was wound down by 1911, but it set the stage. It was a big inspiration for later revolutionary movements in Iran. Okay, so there was First World War, and I mentioned earlier video talking about the Treaty of Sykes-Picot, where the British and the French divided up the Ottoman Empire, creating the modern states of the Middle East. Part of this was the British and the Russians, Tsarist Russia, made a secret agreement to partition Iran. That was one of the secret agreements. It fell through the Russian Revolution in 1917, and Bolsheviks weren't going to go along with this. So the British, they pivoted somewhat. They took over all of Iraq. They gave the French something else. They took over all of Iraq. And there's a period of chaos in Iran in the late teens, the very early 1920s, mainly spillover from the Russian Civil War. So the British intervened in the Russian Civil War. They supported these white groups, and they used Iran as like their conduit. They filtered through Iran. And there were some Iranian communist groups which took power, briefly took power in parts of northern Iran. They didn't last. The Bolsheviks they were in survival mode, facing a civil war anyway, so they had to back out. But it was a period, very early 20s, were a very chaotic period in Persia. I'll call it Iran now. There was kind of a semi-civil war within the Qajar. People who opposed the Qajars fighting around into Iran. Chaotic period. So there was this commander, one of the commanders of the Persian Cossacks, a guy named Riza Khan. He was close to the British. Eventually, the Russian officers were kicked, were pushed out, were fired from the Persian Cossacks. They were replaced by British officers. So Riza Khan wanted to establish a republic, like Turkey, Kemal Ataturk wanted to create a republic. But the British kind of convinced him, nah, we don't want to do that. They convinced him to found a dynasty, which he did. So, 1924, he founded the Pahlavi dynasty, kicked out the Qajars, overthrew the Qajars, founded the Pahlavi dynasty, which they got their name from, I believe it was the script, the writing used by the Sassanids. It harkened back to earlier period in Iranian history. Found the Pahlavi dynasty. There were only two Shahs. So, he was kind of a British puppet. So, he probably did some good things to strengthen the central government, ended the period of chaos. But fast forward 20 years later, the Second World War, and he became a little close to Nazi Germany. And the British wanted to use Iran as a supply. They were allied with the Soviet Union. Strange as it sounds, they were allied with the Soviet Union. They wanted to use Iran as a conduit, to send supplies in, all that stuff. So they were a little worried. So the Soviet Union and Britain cooperated in overthrowing this guy. Soviet Union invaded Iran. They again divided into spheres of influence. Soviet Union invaded Iran. They occupied Tehran. It's a story the wealthy people of Tehran fled. They thought the Soviets were going to shoot them. That didn't happen. The Soviets could have led a social revolution in Iran. They chose not to. There was like a Soviet republic, two of them, Soviet Azeri Republic, People's Republic, and then a Kurdish People's Republic, somewhere in the north. They kept it for about 1946, and then they left. But so anyway, this Pahlavi Shah was deposed. He had a nice retirement in Egypt. Then they put his son named Riza Pahlavi in power. He was the last Shah. Okay, so this guy. Okay, so he was a British puppet. So there was 1952, 1953, the famous coup with Mossadegh. Mossadegh was a veteran politician. He was a nationalist. His group party was the National Front. He was somewhat autocratic, but he was an Iranian nationalist when they were to use its resources for their own development. So he ended up as prime minister. He had a lot of backing, very popular, backing the Shah appointed him prime minister. And as prime minister, he nationalized the Anglo-Iranian oil company. He wanted Iran should get all of the profits. Why are we sending at least 50% to Britain? All of it. Let's do the whole thing. And it was kind of complicated. He was kind of kicked out, and he had to come back. He demoted the Shah, I think deposed the Shah. And okay, so the British were not very happy about this. They approached the U.S. as the Truman administration, and for some reason Truman didn't want to help the British. He wasn't an angel at all himself, but he didn't really like the British that much. So then Eisenhower got in. The British approached Eisenhower administration. Yeah, they'd play ball. So a guy Kermit Roosevelt, who was the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, he orchestrated this coup. Mossady was overthrown, a bit complicated. He was overthrown. His top fathers was shot. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest, and the Shah was restored. Reza Pahlavi was restored in 1953. He was a horrible guy, very repressive. He had a secret police, Savak, which is like the political police, very brutal, very repressive. In Tehran, there's a Savak torture museum. Savak used to go after Iranians outside of Iran. They also used to go after anti-Shah leftists around the world. There's an incident, it's in a movie, the Baader-Meinhof complex, about the Baader-Meinhof group in Germany in the 60s, 70s. There was an incident in West Berlin, actual incident where a whole bunch of leftists were protesting the Shah. He was visiting Germany. He was at some event in Berlin, I believe. And the one incident, the West Berlin police stood down. They left, and then they allowed Savak to come and start beating up these protesters. This was a radicalizing thing on the German left at the time. Well, there were other instances like this as well. Okay, so they were really horrific. Shah, as bad as he was, he actually did want to develop Iran in his own way. He improved women's rights in some ways. He wanted to develop his country. There was huge U.S. influence. Very close to CIA was all over the place. As far as I know, there weren't U.S. bases in Iran, but it was a very close U.S. ally. Lots of U.S. advisors there. It was in the early 60s he tried a land reform program. It was top down. It was totally botched. What happened is he seized the big property, the big landowners, distributed to the peasants, gave these landowners interest in businesses, urban businesses. He wanted to kind of break up the feudal system and make it more of an urbanized, modern capitalist state. But he did it from a top-down method. And first, he alienated the landowners. The land that was given to the peasants was too small to do anything with. Small, not very profitable. And also, as bad as the landowners were in this feudal system, they'd provide some services. They put crops and irrigation, things like that. This was all gone now. So the peasants were essentially pushed off their land. The rural economy largely collapsed. Peasants flooded into the cities. And the cities were then kind of Americanized. People call Iran like a little America, or the shopping mall of the Middle East. Back then, shopping malls were associated with the U.S. So it's really so psychologically disorienting for these people moving into cities. Some writers have written about it. Iranians kind of became more religious. Religion was something they knew from the countryside. They brought it with them. They could hold on to. It's very psychologically very disorienting. The philosopher Foucault, Michel Foucault, wrote a lot about this. Okay, that's one thing going on. So he sees the property confiscated, property of the Shia clergy as well, and he was not able to develop like a pro-regime clergy. So, like by the later 60s, everybody hated him. The landowners hated him. The Shia clergy hated him. The peasants hated him, and then the urban working class hated him as well. There was a boom in the Iranian economy, but a lot of construction, but wage rates were really low. Vast majority of the population did not share in this. There's an incident in 1971. He held this big party at Persepolis. Forgot to mention Persepolis had been the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid dynasty. Alexander the Great burned it down, based on retaliation for the Persians burning Athens. So the ruins are still there, really stunningly beautiful. Anyway, 1971, the Shah Pahlavi had this big party. The glitterati, Elizabeth Taylor, movie stars of that era were there, heads of state, and so he spent like $1 billion on it. This is in a country where half the population was under the poverty level. And this was an extremely bad look, as they say, extremely bad move. And a lot of people really hated him. So throughout the 1970s, there were like three waves of urban protest movements that were crushed. There's a large left. There's a Tuda, the Stalinist Communist Party. They had a big following. There's a Fedayeen, who were Islamist left. Then there were a bunch of other groups. There's a socialist. There was a Trotskyist group connected with the U.S. Socialist Workers Party. A bunch of other things. And the left had a following. According to one thing I read, there was one where leftist rally, like 500,000 people, 500,000 people were there. But the Islamists also had a big following as well. Okay, so there was a guy, Ayatollah Khomeini, clergy, leader of the Shia clergy. He was in exile in France. And he gave snuck in these tape cassettes, and they wildly pop where he denounced the Shah, how corrupt they were. He denounced the Shah's regime and denounced the westernization of Iran. And it's had a big, huge underground following. Okay, so innocent, and I think it was 1977 or 78. There was a fire in a movie theater in Abadan, which is a city. I believe it's on the Caspian Sea. It's connected to the oil industry. So, by the way, I forgot to mention Jimmy Carter, U.S. president, 76 to 1980. He had a thing on human rights. It was hypocritical in a lot of ways, but he got urged the Shah to allow more freedom of speech. Oddly, the Shah did. Like, to some extent, ease censorship. Worst possible time for him. If you're a brutal dictator, widely hated by your population, you don't want to allow freedom of speech just when there's a rebellion running against you. Kind of bad timing. So anyway, the newspapers and media can bitterly denouncing the Shah. It kind of backfired on the Shah. He thought he could manipulate this. Okay, so the incident I think it was 1977 or 78 in the movie theater, Abadan. The movie theater was playing a movie called The Deers, which was sort of critical of the regime. Anyway, someone started a fire. They locked the doors and set a fire in the theater. Somewhere between 300 and 500 people were burned alive. No one knows, to this day, no one knows exactly how many. And according to Wikipedia, mainstream Western sources, the Islamists did it. I don't know, maybe they did. I don't know. It was widely believed in Iran that the Shah's government blamed, quote, Islamic Marxists. It sounds like something Trump would say, Islamic Marxists. But it was widely believed in Iran there was a false flag. The government did this to blame the Islamic, widely believed to be a false flag. So that triggered revolution. There were waves of protests and rioting everywhere in Iran. And it went on for week after week. This went on for quite a while. And the Shah was surprisingly restrained in crushing this. The Shah's family and the U.S. actually advised him to crush this thing. He would kill a couple thousand people. The Shah would normally have no hesitation about doing this. He was not a humanitarian by any means. He would have no hesitation about doing this, but for some reason he was kind of restrained. It turned out he was dying of cancer. And he basically wanted a good regime for a good receptive population for his son to succeed him. That's why he didn't have a bloody cracker. Normally, he would have no hesitation about this whatsoever. My hair is in my face. Okay, here we go. Okay, so Shah went to Mexico for treatment. He went to Panama. Henry Kissinger pulled some strings so he could go to Los Angeles. And big mistake. What happened then? Okay, so Khomeini, the U.S. kind of urged France to allow Khomeini to come to Iran. U.S. the idea was, okay, we lost to Iran, but we don't want the leftists to take over. That would be really bad. At least let the Islamists take over, and then they did. So Khomeini flew to Iran. There was a secular, after the Shah resigned, there was a briefly secular I forget the name. A prime minister who was secular. He was elected by like 70%, widely popular. He was a leader in the opposition. He was deposed impeached like a month later. Bazargan, I forget his name, sorry. But, okay, then the Khomeini came in. He basically declared an Islamic Republic. It was about 2 years before this group could consolidate their power. So an early thing, the new regime, new government actually wanted good ties with the U.S., as strange as that sounds. But what happened is they urged Americans in the U.S. to evacuate the embassy. Like, we can't guarantee your safety. It's a volatile situation. Just get out of here. And a lot of people did. But about 33 people still stayed in the U.S. embassy in Tehran. They were CIA. Their job was to shred the documents. This is before digitalization, and Tehran was like CIA Central for the vast area of Russia, vast area of Central Asia. There was the headquarters of CIA. They stored the archives. It was very safe. They stored the archives there, all the information. So, okay, and these guys were people, men and women, were busy shredding documents there. They even went to what happened is students broke into the embassy and they took them hostage. And their goal, what they wanted to do, is find definitive evidence that the U.S. was involved in the Mossadegh coup. That was still a traumatic time in modern Iranian history, bitterly traumatic time. They wanted to find definitive evidence the U.S. was behind this and get an apology from the U.S. And this would lead to healing and, okay, hey, we told you so, and then finally lead to some healing. It didn't play out this way. Jimmy Carter refused to apologize. So the students, anyway, they got the shredded documents. They gave them to elementary school students and middle school students. Said like, you guys like to do puzzles, work on this, and they did. After I don't know how long it took, like maybe about a year, but they put the shredded documents back together. They reassembled these documents and a ton of information on the CIA. A lot of it was Iranian politicians who were on the take, who were being paid up by the CIA and military people. They were quickly eliminated. Also, the CIA networks in large parts of Central Asia, they were eliminated. They were eliminated in It was a big disaster for the CIA at that time. And they did find definitive evidence of the U.S. involvement in the coup. And Jimmy Carter refused to apologize. Later on, Obama did apologize, but by then it didn't really matter. Okay, so this went on. Then there was in the U.S. thing in the U.S. The way the media played it. U.S. had just lost the Vietnam War a few years earlier, and the way the U.S. media played is, oh my God, they got our hostages. Like there's a TV news broadcasters would count the number of days. It was like a little over a year, I think. What happened is Reagan was running for president, the Reagan people, and they made a deal with the Iranians. Said, don't let the hostages, finally we're about to release the hostages, don't release them until after the election. They wanted to ensure Jimmy Carter lost. And when they did, the hostages were released after Reagan was inaugurated. That was some dirty tricks there. Okay, so that was going on. Then a little bit later was the Iran hostage, the Iran Contra. U.S. was sending F-14s. So the only two countries which had F-14 fighter jets was the U.S. and Iran. Iran still had them, but U.S. was not giving military equipment to Iran at that point. So they bought them at like 10 times the price, but they secretly bought them from the U.S. And the U.S. was then using this money, Reagan administration was using this money to fund the Contras, the right-wing terror groups in Nicaragua and El Salvador. And it was banned, not legal. The Bolin Amendment was officially banned, but they were doing so. So that was a big thing. And the Iranians were kind of manipulating the Americans. Okay, so this hostage thing really forced a radicalization of the Iranian Revolution. Some horrible things. After they consolidated their power, they cracked down on women's rights. I forget what year, probably 1980, 81. They said they required women to wear chador, which is like a cloak which covers the whole body. The preferred color was black. Traditional Iranian chadors are not black. That was really unusual, but women had to wear black chadors. And a million people in Tehran protested. A million people widely hated, and the government backed down. Said, okay, no, we were misunderstood. We just would like women to wear this in certain government offices, but, to wear it all the time. But then over the next year, they gradually reinstated it. And cracking down on women's rights was kind of like a wedge issue to crack down on in so many other areas. And, of course, the Islamification of society. There was one thing going, the left was crushed. There was a story, the Central Committee of the Tuda, the Communist Party, they were arrested, they were tortured in prison. So then they put on like a television roundtable where they denounced Marxism and embraced Shia Islam. Said, we're no longer Marxists. Shia Islam is the way to go. One guy held out in prison. He was killed. And it was horrible things like that. Then there was the women were stoned for adultery or prostitution, things like that. The height of the repression was the late 80s. There was the Iraq War. U.S. pushed Iraq. U.S. always hated the post-revolutionary Iran. Hated. They really never got over losing Iran. Iran had become like a central hub after the Vietnam War. U.S. imperialism pivoted. Iran as one of the regional hubs, and the U.S. never got over losing that. Now, to this day, really, really bitter about losing it. So anyway, the U.S. pushed Iraq into a war. The U.S. was in kind of allied with Saddam Hussein, and Iran and Iraq would seize oil wells on each other's borders for decades, tit for tat. Iran would seize an oil well, then give it back, then Iraq. But they would go back and forth for a long time. But U.S. put Saddam up to this. He seized an oil well and also more land. There's a traditionally Arab area of Iraq, and you say you can take it. We'll give you all the support. You can get away with taking this. And Khomeini unexpectedly made it into a holy war. So really bloody war, horrifically destructive one for 7 years. Very bloody, especially for Iran. They lost something like 1 million people, and it's really horrific. Finally wound down when it finally ended. Very costly for both countries, but especially Iran. Okay, so they eased the repression. Iran had to ease the repression a lot. Rafsanjani got in, more of a moderate and neoliberal. So the moderates are actually the Iran today, the Islamic Republic. It's a republic. There are political parties and elections. There are many political parties. The Iranian state, both nationally and locally, is highly factionalized. There's zillions of parties. Some of them are pretty militant sounding names, like one party, small parties like the Combat Battalion of Militant Clergy, stuff like that. The Revolutionary Order of, it's just a super hyper militant. There was not really militant, but okay. And there are parties, but they all have to be Islamist. It's first Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini was like, forget his title, but he was like the spiritual leader of it. And then he died in 1989. Khamenei, who's still there, he was like the spiritual real leader of Iran. There's a Guardian Council, I forget, Council of Experts. So they have to vet anyone running for office. So you have elections and parties, but they're all Islamists. They all have to be vetted. It's kind of a rigged gerrymandered system in a lot of ways. But there are elections. You can criticize the government, unlike China. Like in China, you say, Xi Jinping's an asshole. You go to a crowded restaurant, you say it's in public, you can get in trouble. But not in Iran. You can't criticize Islam or even advocate secularism, but you can criticize the government. People always do. There's bitter criticism, constant bitter criticism of the government here. People do criticize it a lot. Let me see. The 80s Rafsanjani, sorry, 90s Rafsanjani was president. They abolished the post of prime minister. He was kind of a neoliberal and was going to Iran went to go in a neoliberal direction. He wanted to get closer to the West, wasn't really allowed to. There was Khatami, who I believe early 90s to 2009 he was president. He was a reformer. The two broad factions in Iranian politics are the principalists and the reformers. The principalists, they don't quite correspond to Western politics either. The principalists are hardline Islamists, but they're rooted in the working class. They're anti-imperialist. They don't want to they're opposed to U.S. imperialism. They're more pro-Palestinian. And they're kind of big on workers' rights or some aspects of social justice. You can debate about that. The reformers partly came out of the remnants of the Islamist left, but they want better ties with the West. They're big on more freedom, ending the restrictions, the social restrictions, more liberalized Iranian society. So Khatami was in power, I think it was 96 to 2009. He was a reformer. He was viciously attacked from the right, from the principles. There was I think it was Tabriz, there was a liberal journal, which the Basiji, the religious police, shut down. And they raided a university dormitory, which apparently had some connections with this liberal journal. They killed a couple people. And this was a huge blow to Khatami's government. He couldn't really do much. But Khatami wanted better ties with the U.S. after 9/11. He said, we really sympathize. We have solidarity with the Americans. We have people in Afghanistan. We can work with you. If you want to, fight the Taliban, we're more than happy to help you. Our people will aid you. So George Bush, stabbed him in the back. He made a speech including Iran and the axis of evil. Even basically implying which countries we're going to have to overthrow. So this was a shot in the arm to the right wing or the principalist faction that could we're never going to get along with the West no matter what we do. It's just not going to work. And then, so he was kind of stabbed him in the back in a lot of ways. 2009, there was a disputed election. Mousavi was running against Ahmadinejad. And Ahmadinejad was kind of came off as kind of an unhinged figure, far right wing, just completely unhinged figure. Mousavi was reformist. When he was young, he said his hero was Che Guevara. Some people say he did play a horrible role. In one stage, he did crack down on dissidents. He did have some blood on his hands. It's disputed. Anyway, it was a largely stolen election. The clergy didn't really want him in. There's a big protest movement erupted, and there's anger about the restriction on behavior and things like that. Big protest movement, the Green Movement. And it kind of went beyond Mousavi's campaign. He apparently tried to co-opt it. There was one thing, he and his wife were artists. His wife was an artist. And when it's in there was supposed to be iconic photo of his wife standing on this traffic divider with a chador partly on her, holding up a rose, and this became like the symbol of the movement. Other people laughed at it, like, dude, it's not your campaign. We don't care about your wife. His wife was attacked for some reason. We don't care about your wife. It's other issues, not about you. So there was some pushback. But anyway, this movement was eventually crushed. Large parts of the state supported the Green Movement too, but it was eventually crushed. Ahmadinejad got in. Interesting character. He actually was a first non-clergy. He was not a clergy. He was a nuclear engineer, actually. And people said the Green Movement too, the military kind of stepped in. Iran became somewhat less Islamist, more military. There was a somewhat more emphasis on Iran's Persian past, pre-Islamic past in some ways. And it was gradually liberalized, even under Ahmadinejad. He was a hardliner. He was kind of came from this one Shia faction that did not believe in the theocracy. Said, it's up to the Mahdi. Did not recognize the Islamic State. It's up to the Mahdi, the Messiah. We have no right establishing a theocracy. Similar to some like Torah Jews in Israel who don't recognize the state of Israel. And he and Ahmadinejad represent a bridge between this group and the Iranian state. Like, it's okay to work for the state. I don't know. And in New York, he made this thing. There's no such thing. We don't have homosexuals in Iran, which is absurd. Debate about what he meant by that. And that's a whole other story. But anyway, the current there was Raisi got in. He was also a hardliner. He was killed in a freak helicopter crash in Azerbaijan after like a year, maybe 7 months ago. Widely suspicious. Widely, Israel was behind it. There was a big fight with Israel several different times, and Iran's been recent period extremely restrained, and there's a 12-day war, and not really a truce, but a cessation of hostilities. Anyway, Raisi was replaced by Pezeshkian, who's Azeri, ethnic Azeri. Azeris have played a big role in Iranian politics. Okay, so that's the situation. Now, I support Iran. I don't support the theocracy, but I would support Iran insofar as they're fighting Zionism and U.S. imperialism. And Max Blumenthal had some interesting. He went to Iran recently. Some interesting observations. First, 20% of the population do support the regime, hardcore support. So even they complain about the economy. The U.S. sanctions have been devastating. Iran really devastating. And widespread complaint. Everybody complains about it. It's really devastating to Iran. Economy is very much on the toilet, has been for quite some time. Even still, Iran is able to bypass it with the BRICS. They have a close alliance with Russia and with China, more close with China. Very military alliance with China. There's some competition with Russia with oil, but they're very close to China now. I support Iran as soon as they're fighting back U.S. imperialism. And, Max Blumenthal said, the hardline, there is a large liberal layer. Listen to the BBC. There's the BBC Persian language, and they kind of Western propaganda that why are we spending all this money supporting the Palestinians? Why are we doing this? And there's a liberal layer, but he said there also, he's talked to Marxist-minded people. People approached him and wanted to talk. There are Marxist-minded people who don't like the regime but recognize the need to fight U.S. imperialism. Who recognize this need. Um, okay, so there's some debate about the Iranian economy. There's some people who think Iran is socialist. Now it might sound absurd at first, and I kind of don't think it is myself. But what is the nature of the Iranian economy? There's a an Iranian press TV journalist. He used to write for the Sacred Blog, which was a Russian nationalist geopolitical blog. I used to read it. It closed a couple of years ago, or right when the Ukraine war started. Anyway, this guy was Rami Mazahari, and a journalist. He was the Paris correspondent for Press TV. He was in the U.S. He covered the DNC. Haven't found anything he wrote after 2024. Maybe he's just writing in Farsi now. Interesting guy. He claimed he's a leftist, and he's talked about Trotskyist politics. He's not a Trotskyist, but he says he understands it. And he's read Trotsky. He understands. He's discussing the theory of permanent revolution, discussing this. And interestingly, he claims Iran is socialist, non-Marxist socialist, Islamic socialist. I don't know if that's possible, but he makes his case that most of the economy is under state control, but 80% of the economy is under state control. And he makes his case there. There's another guy, there's another writer who goes through, I'll provide a link, who goes through the structure of the Iranian economy, like they're the Islamic charities Banyats, who are Islamic charities. They play a big role in Iran, social services. They're operating at a loss. They're losing money. They control 30% of the economy. Then on top of that, there are other groups. The Revolutionary Guard controls a large network of businesses and foundations, and they're a big chunk of the Iranian economy as well. And then there's the state sector. We'll know about 80% of the Iranian economy is state-run directly or indirectly. So it brings up the question, what is the nature of the Iranian economy? I mean, socialism is economy directly controlled by the working class, which Iran isn't. There's clergy, oligarchical clergy networks and other groups control it. But can you say it's a deformed worker state, like not run by the working class, but collectivized anyway? I don't know. There's pushback. So this Mazarari had a big fight with the World Socialist website, a Trotskyist group. I'll provide some links. Really, they totally slammed. There's some back and forth on this for a while, which is kind of interesting. Also, an article in Jacobin, which goes through, says Iran is thoroughly neoliberal, but doesn't talk about the nuts and bolts of the economy. I mean, you can be highly nationalized and still have neoliberal elements. So I don't really know. So anyway, in closing, just like to say, I'd be critical. Iran has been liberalizing a lot in recent years. Oh, by the way, women's rights and LGBT rights. Just wanted to mention there was the big protest movement, 2022, over a woman, forget her name, who died. The Basiji arrested her. She's a Kurdish woman. The Basiji arrested her for not wearing her headscarf, the religious police. And the story is they threw her against a wall, and later she got a cerebral hemorrhage and died from it. And this created a big protest movement. So many people think this may not have, she died, she already had some brain issues anyway, and maybe a color revolution. Many people accuse this big protest movement 2022 really being a color revolution. The way it quickly escalated to violence, like 60 police were killed, very quickly escalated. And, Iran, whatever you want to say about it, it's in the crosshairs of U.S. imperialism. They want to take down this regime for a really long time. No, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean you don't have enemies. So this can be a complicated situation. Women, by the way, something like play a huge role in Iranian society. Talk about how oppressed women are. Something like 80% of all high-tech STEM and other high-tech university graduates are women. They play enormous role. High-tech professions are so overrepresented. There was a recent glimpse of Iranian missile tracking thing, and everyone there was a woman. Was a woman. They were it kind of interesting. So it's not quite what people think. They removed the requirement to wear the hijab. They removed it. So cities, it's completely optional. Some women have a headscarf. Occasionally the Basiji will still unexpectedly require someone to wear it. So some people wear a scarf not on their head, but it's not a requirement anymore. It's more and more, and Iranian society is more and more liberalizing. Okay, LGBT rights, you can say there aren't any, but it's more complicated than that. Sodomy, however you define sodomy, is officially the death penalty for sodomy. But to charge someone with this, you need to have two male witnesses, and they have to explain why they were there. So it isn't enforced at all. There are there are underground gay bars and gay scene in Tehran. The police know about it. They kind of leave them alone. It's kind of understood. They don't really go after these people. It's considerably liberalized since the 1980s, different world. Also, there's a transgender movement in here. It's legal. There's a trans filmmaker who's friends with Khomeini, and he issued a fatwa legalizing transgender surgery. There is a trans movement in Iran. There are 4 documentaries about it on YouTube. I've seen 2 of them. One is Be Like Others and Birthday. Be Like Others is really interesting. I might provide a link for it. It's worth watching if you're into it. So there is a transgender movement. I mean, Iran is a very conservative society, so some of these people don't have a great time of it, but it is legitimate, accepted movement in Iranian culture. Iran has big film industry too, big film scene. I might make a future video talk about Iranian films. So anyway, overall, I'm critical of any type of theocracy. I would really hate it, but there are different currents in Iran. And this war, by the way, recent war has had the opposite effect than they intended. People more support the government. They rallied around. Like Iran does have a high degree of national cohesion, even there were many groups during the war with Iraq. People supported their country. They did not, they didn't like the government, they didn't like the regime, but they supported the United around. So now this recent war with Israel, people support their country, and this had the opposite effect than they intended. And I hope the liberalization continues, but I do support Iran. They are a center. The primary contradiction in the world is U.S. imperialism, and I strongly support Iran as long as they're fighting this. So if you enjoy my content, like and subscribe. I did come out a little confused. I'm going to have to do a little editing. Anyway, thank you very much, and have a great day.